Please call your next witness.
Your Honor, I believe it's cross-examination.
We need to get the jury in first.
Okay, thanks.
Yes. You may come back around. And bring the jury in.
Yes, sir.
Please turn off all electronic devices.
Thank you. Now, cross-examination.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Lawrence.
Good morning.
You indicated that you've been a photographer for a few years, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you take the job very seriously, correct?
Yes, sir.
And use high-quality equipment?
Yes, sir.
So the kind of cameras you were using were high definition, very clear pictures usually of everything you were photographing, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall when exactly you were first approached by the Raleigh Police Department concerning your photographs of this wedding?
I believe it was about 2 weeks after the wedding.
Well, do you recall when they came and got the photograph or the digital version of the photographs?
And like I said, I think it was a couple of weeks after the wedding to my house to get copies.
Well, would August 5th be possible?
Possibly.
Okay. And when they came, did they ask to download all the photographs?
Correct.
And you allowed them to do that, correct?
Yes, sir.
And the photographs had all been taken by you and your wife, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And y'all work as a team?
Mm-hmm.
And you both use high-quality equipment, is that
Correct.
fair to say? Were the Raleigh police were at your, is it your home where they came?
Yes, sir.
They were there for a while because it took a long time for them to download all the photographs, right?
Right.
And as you mentioned, it could have been 4,000 or 5,000. Does 2,600 sound possible to you?
It's possible. It sounds like
You think that
probably,
sounds low?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay. You were in a unique position to observe the different individuals at the wedding, all the guests, right?
Yes.
And you and your wife were in the same place some of the time, but not all the time, correct?
Correct.
Now, did you get there, was it around 4 or before 4?
I feel like it would have been, I honestly don't remember. I feel like it would have been earlier than 4, but it's possible. It could have been 4.
And some of the first things you photographed when you got there were the preparations for the wedding, is that right?
Yes.
So you and your wife took photographs of the bride getting ready, took photographs of Kimberly Matthews putting the cake out, that sort of thing.
Yes, sir.
And at that time, when you got there, the only people that were at the home were family members, is that right?
Correct.
Do you recall ever seeing Thomas during that time period before the ceremony?
Yes, he was there immediately when we first got there.
Okay. And did you interact with him at all at that point?
Yeah, we said hello. He was in his room. Yeah.
Was he getting ready?
Yeah, sort of, yeah.
Okay. And he wasn't drinking or consuming alcohol at that point, was he?
No, not that I could see.
Now, if I could approach, Your Honor,
You may.
I'd like to ask you about some of these pictures. And first I'd like to ask you, showing you State's Exhibit, I believe this appears to be 14. The printing quality of these particular prints, do they reflect the high definition character of your equipment?
Sort of, yeah.
Well, the resolution is what I'm specifically talking about. Do you think that's a high resolution photograph?
Well, what is your,
Well,
idea
is
of
it,
time
is it
resolution?
does it reflect the clarity that?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yep.
And so in that particular picture, did you come to know who the individuals on the front row are in State's Exhibit 17?
Yes, sir.
Can you identify them, please?
Yes, Dr. Matthews, and then the the stepfather, the real father to Nicole.
Her biological father?
Yeah, biological father, and then Miss Matthews and Nicole's stepmother.
And in this particular picture, can you see JT and Thomas in the background?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And this occurred during the actual ceremony itself, which began around 7:30 or so?
Yes, sir.
Now, your equipment puts a timestamp on your photographs, correct?
Correct.
So all these photographs that you've looked at have a timestamp associated with them, right?
Correct.
All right. Do any of these photographs have the timestamp on the print itself?
No, sir.
Okay. And is your equipment calibrated? I mean, has it got the correct time when you put a timestamp
Yes,
on the
sir.
photograph?
Mm-hmm.
And with regards to this is after the ceremony. This picture State's Exhibit number 16. That's the time that the guest, well, you tell me, is that the time when the guests after the ceremony made their way to the front of the house?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And in this particular photograph, is it difficult to identify exactly who's in the front of the house? You don't see the Matthews.
Yeah, I mean,
you don't see Kim and Chip Matthews out there.
No, I do not.
The State's Exhibit number 21, this is a picture of Nicole and Jason, bride and groom, correct?
Correct.
And before that picture is taken, did you take some photographs of them having dinner upstairs?
A few, yes.
Okay. And so how long were they upstairs eating dinner, if you recall?
I'd say maybe 20 minutes or so, 20, 30 minutes.
And so immediately after that is when they made their first entrance.
Yes.
And was that a big event at the wedding?
It was, yes.
Okay. And did it appear that most of the guests' focus was on that entrance onto the patio?
Yes, sir.
And of course, right after that was when they had their first dance, correct?
Correct.
And showing you State's Exhibit number 22, in that particular picture, the only other guests you see during the dance in this particular photo do you know who that is? Alex
Yes.
Matthews?
Mm-hmm.
And that was the sister of Thomas
Yes.
and Nicole.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see some of the young folks at the high top table, but you don't see any other guests towards the house, do you?
Right.
Now, do you recall during this period of time where Kim and Chip Matthews were?
I do not.
Do you expect that you have photographs that would show where they were?
Possibly. Yep.
This photograph is State's Exhibit, appears to be 28. Is this where Nicole was dancing with her father, her biological father?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and can you see Kim Matthews in the photograph as well?
Yes, sir.
And did this happen directly after the first dance with Jason and her husband?
Yes, sir.
And so I'm going to show you now State's Exhibit 26. Same dance. Nicole's still dancing with her father, correct?
Yes, sir.
And turning your attention to the table where some of the young people were standing, at this point, can you see JT and Thomas at that table?
No, sir.
And can you tell from that photograph whether there's drinks, alcoholic beverages on that table?
Looks like there's one glass on the table I can see.
And showing you State's Exhibit number, appears to be 24, same time frame, dance between Nicole and her father, same table with just Josh McCoy, Anna Ergish, Natalie Freeman, no JT or Thomas, correct?
Correct.
And you see glasses on the table there.
Yes, looks like it.
How many?
I can see one clearly, maybe another one, I don't know. It's hard to
So
tell.
one, maybe two, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, this photograph, which is State's Exhibit 40, that the state introduced, was a picture of JT coming from the back of the house. You recall taking this photo?
Yes, sir.
Do you know who this individual is with the, excuse me, this is State's Exhibit number 40. Do you know who the tall individual with the bow tie is in the front of the photograph?
No, sir.
If we could have 3N2 3829, please. Now, the man in the bow tie, tall bow tie, and has his hair pulled back in the back, you didn't ever meet him during the course of the wedding?
Not formally, no.
Okay. Do you know who he is?
I do not.
And that individual is talking to Nicole, who's the bride, correct?
Correct.
Do you know, well, this, of course, this photograph was time-stamped, right?
Correct.
Do you know what time it was, or approximately what time it was when you took this photograph?
It was later in the evening, but I can't say for sure what time that was.
Do you know whether it was before or after the cake cutting?
I feel like that may have, maybe before the cake cutting? I'm not sure.
But you're not sure?
Yeah.
But the timestamp would show, correct?
Correct.
And then looking at State's Exhibit 36, you can take that down, please. In this particular photograph, is this a photograph of some of the guests at the cake cutting?
Yes, sir.
Okay, if we could have the lights back on, please. And you can see JT in the background?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You see Mr. Chip Matthews in the foreground. Can you tell what he's drinking, if anything, in that photograph?
He's drinking something. I'm not sure what, though. It's hard to tell.
Did you notice over the course of your time at the wedding whether he was drinking alcoholic beverages?
I did not.
What about Kim Matthews?
I don't know about that either.
With the house, excuse me, I'll strike that, please. State's Exhibit 39, take a look at that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a picture of, is that a picture of Nicole, Anna Ergish and Thomas, and is that one of Jason Kazelwer's sons?
Correct.
Do you recall what time that was taken?
I do not.
Okay. Thank you. What time did you leave that evening?
Like I said, it was later in the evening, after everything had kind of calmed down. I don't remember the specific time. It was probably after 11, I would imagine. I don't know.
And the DJ was playing music up until the time you left. Were you there when the DJ stopped?
Yes.
And you think that was around 11?
I believe he stopped a little bit before that.
And some of the last pictures you took were of Jason and Nicole out on the back patio with all the guests gone, correct?
Correct, yes.
And during that period of time between the cake cutting and the end of the wedding, was pretty much your focus being on the back patio?
Yes, sir.
Now, that house was a large house, wasn't it?
Yes.
And you actually saw a good bit of that house in taking your photographs, right?
Correct.
Lots of different locations, upstairs and downstairs.
Mm-hmm.
But you never went to the basement, correct?
No, sir.
Did you take some photographs of the inside of the house?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And of course, those photographs had timestamps on them, correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you recall ever photographing Chip or Kim Matthews with JT or any of the other young folks?
Not with them, no.
Okay. That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Redirect.
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Step down, sir. Let's call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, this time the state will call Mr. Brian Johnson to the stand.
You think that went all right? Okay.
Sir, if you would, please place your left hand on the Bible, raise your right. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you give before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, still good morning.
Good morning.
Can you please state your name for the record?
My name is Brian Johnson.
And Mr. Johnson, where do you live, sir?
I live on the Circle in 5 Points, so very close to the Matthewses.
You know the Matthews. Tell us how you know the Matthews.
I know them through their daughter Nicole. She is also a yoga teacher, and that is how I know her.
Are you a yoga teacher?
I am.
How long have you been a yoga teacher?
I've been a yoga teacher for about 3 years.
How long have you known Nicole?
Since she returned from grad school in New York, so about 3-4 years.
Do you know the rest of the Matthews family, Dr. Matthews and Mrs. Kim Matthews?
No.
Had you ever been over to their house prior to June 28th of 2014?
Yeah, a couple times.
And was that to visit
Nicole, yeah.
They have another son and daughter, Thomas Matthews and Alex Matthews. Do you know them as well?
I had met Alex before at lunch, but I had never met Thomas until the actual day of the wedding.
Until the wedding day.
Yep.
It sounds like you went to the wedding there on June 28th, 2014.
I did.
Were you a guest of Nicole?
Nicole's, yes.
When did you arrive at that wedding, Mr. Johnson?
10 minutes before it started.
Did anyone go with you?
Yeah, my husband with me.
Did you have prior to this date? Did you know J.T. Taylor, Anna Ergish, Natalie Freeman, or Josh McCoy?
I did not.
At any point during that wedding, sir, did you come into contact with any of those individuals?
I did. The first contact was when we were standing in front of the house.
Okay.
After the ceremony was over, we were all ushered into the front of the house, and as I was in line to get a drink, one of the, I would assume Thomas, turned and introduced me to JT and said, "Oh, this is, Brian, he's a yoga teacher, you should talk to him." And so that was my beginning interaction.
And tell us about that interaction, Mr. Johnson, kind of what happened there.
They had asked me, like, how long had I taught yoga, when did I start as a kid, what did it do for me, just the basics of why I did it. They all seemed very genuinely interested.
And was this conversation primarily with JT at this point?
Yes.
Did he tell you what his interest was in yoga and that?
Just why. Just why, like, why do I like yoga, like, what does it do for me in terms of meditation, stretching, body ability, anxiety, focus, all those sort of things.
He mentioned to you that he was involved in athletics or anything like that?
I did not.
At that point, were the girls there as well, along with Thomas and the other?
I would assume yes. I have no, like, initial recollection of, yes, they were right there, but I don't remember.
At that point, Mr. Johnson, were they actually in line with you or standing at a table?
They were standing, like, I guess with their backs towards the house, so yeah, there were tables right there.
Mr. Johnson, at that point, did you notice if they had wine glasses or drinking alcohol or anything like that?
I did not, but I do remember that JT had a water bottle in his hand.
JT had a water bottle
He did.
at that point. Could you tell whether or not they were impaired at that point?
I would say no.
Any of the teams? Could you tell if they'd been drinking at all?
Could not.
How long would you say that interaction lasted with JT, Mr. Johnson?
The movement of the line, maybe 4 or 5 minutes. It was quite packed up front.
And did you, in fact, get a glass of wine there?
I did.
How did you get that wine?
I had to ask for it.
Do you recall if there were other wine glasses out on the table at that point?
I do not.
You don't recall?
I think it was like everything was like poured for us instantly and like handed to us because there was just so many people. If they were going to fill it and sit it, there wouldn't be enough time.
All right. Mr. Johnson, did you have any interaction with the teenagers later on?
No.
In the evening?
Aside from when I saw JT in the library, that was the only interaction I had with them for the entire evening.
Did you see the teenagers out in front of the table?
No.
You mentioned that you saw JT in the library.
I did.
And when did you see JT in the library?
I would assume it was after the cake cutting.
Tell us where the library is in the Matthews house.
Sure, the Matthews house, if I am facing out of the house, as we've seen in all the pictures, when you turn right to go into the kitchen, from the kitchen it then goes into the downstairs library. So you have to go in through an outdoor, there's the large kitchen, and then you go into the library to then go to the foyer.
And where was JT when you saw him?
He was sitting in the library.
What was your interaction like with JT at that point?
I walked in and asked him how he was, and I knew that he was intoxicated and glazed over, you could say. I asked him, how was his evening? How were things going? Just basic banter and checking in on him. We talked about him graduating at Ravenscroft, like how was school, a little bit more about yoga. And then I blatantly asked him, I was just like, so what are you on? And he said that he was inebriated and that he was stoned.
So what did he say he'd been drinking?
He did, yes.
He did say
He did say he'd been drinking, yes. And so then I asked him instinctively, so you're not going to drive anywhere, right? And I said, are you just going to stay here? Or something going to pick you up? And he said, yes. I have a personal connection with that because my grandfather was killed by a drunk driver. So whenever it comes to anyone that's intoxicated that you know could have the possibility of driving, I was just like, you are not going to go anywhere. And so I had a moment of making sure that he was going to stay in the vicinity. So I asked him and he said yes. At the breaking up of the conversation, he said that he wanted to go check on one of his friends because she was not handling her liquor well. So he said he was going to go check on her. So I assumed that he then turned and went out back into the kitchen, and I assumed he was going towards the basement. And then I went out the front.
Did you see JT any more that night, sir?
I did not.
Okay. And did you know if anyone was in the basement?
I did not.
Did JT explain to you how he got into that room?
He did not.
He was just sitting.
He was just there. Yeah.
How long would you say your interaction lasted with him?
5 to 6 minutes, very quickly.
You mentioned you thought he was intoxicated. How could you tell he was intoxicated?
Basic understanding of someone. I mean, like he was very mentally cognitive. Like he knew, like he could talk about school and like leaving and how things were. He just seemed to have that just glazed over look to him. But it wasn't fumbly. It wasn't, his speech was fine.
You said you went to the front of the house. Which way? Why did you go to the front of the house?
If I remember correctly, in one of those photos when I'm talking to Nicole, she realized that she was missing an earring. And so she asked me to go look at the large magnolia that's in the front of the house and to check the ground to see if her earring was there.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
May I publish State's Exhibit 40, which is 3N23829.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson, do you see yourself there in the photograph?
I do.
Okay, where and there's a laser pointer. If you can, using that laser pointer, show to the
That
members
is
of the
me
jury
right there.
where you are. And who are you speaking with?
I'm speaking with Nicole.
And you said you had a couple interactions with JT. Do you recognize him there in that photograph?
Correct. He is right there.
Is he wearing the blue bow tie?
He is also wearing a bow tie, yes.
Looking at, and you can use the photograph here in front of you, but can you tell from that photograph what JT has in his hand at that point?
That's a champagne flute.
And Mr. Johnson, when JT is coming your general direction, do you recall if you had any interaction with him at that point, saw him at that point?
I did not.
You mentioned going back into the house using this photograph, and I know it's the exterior of the house, but can you kind of demonstrate to the jury where you would have gone inside the house and where you saw?
I'm pretty sure these doors, if I did not go through those doors, I turned and went through the kitchen and around because these are the windows to the library right there.
So the library is directly off of the kitchen that we've been talking about. The cake cutting and the champagne glasses, where did that all occur, sir?
That was in the kitchen.
Okay, so right there to the right.
To the right, correct.
As you come in. Thank you, sir. Other than JT, Mr. Johnson, did you ever see the other teenagers at any point?
Did not. I'm sure they were around, but I had no interaction with them.
How about Thomas?
No.
No interaction with
No.
him? Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I don't have any further questions at this time.
Cross-examination.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Johnson.
Good morning.
That photograph, I believe it was State's Exhibit, Exhibit 40 that Mr. Waller showed you. In that picture, you're talking to Nicole, correct?
Yes.
And JT's in the background, right?
Yes.
At that particular time, was that at some point after the cake cutting?
I would assume yes.
Okay. And do you recall during that period of time seeing Kim and Chip Matthews out on the patio?
I'm sure they were there, but I don't have any specific recollection.
But you don't remember specifically seeing them out
No.
there? Okay. And you don't have any, you weren't paying close attention to where they were during the course of the
I was not.
wedding? Okay. And as far as your interactions with JT, is it your testimony you didn't have any interactions with Anna Urgish or Natalie Freeman or Thomas?
No, sir.
Okay. And with regards to Kim and Chip Matthews, did you interact with them at all?
I interacted with Miss Matthews when she came around the side of the house to draw the crowd from the front to back to where the food was. And so she had come along the side of the house, and there were a lot of the other yoga teachers congregating in one of the tables, and she asked us to follow her around the side and go to the back of the house. That was my only interaction with Miss Matthews.
And did you stay at the wedding till the end, or?
I did.
And so you were there when the music ended?
I would assume yes. I mean, we were there until it was starting to dwindle, and then we just walked home.
And did you spend any time during the period of time after the cake cutting? Were there people in different parts of the house that you were aware of?
But I was aware, I'd say primarily like downstairs in the kitchen, the back of the house, the back patio, where the food was. I don't ever remember anyone being upstairs or in the front foyer or the front of the house at all.
And in the library, when you were speaking to JT in the library, is that a small room?
It was a very small room,
Okay.
yes.
And it's very close to the kitchen, correct?
Correct.
And at the time you were speaking to him, were there people working in the kitchen, the
Oh,
caterers?
I'm sure, yes.
And do you recall during your conversation with him, anyone passing on the other side of the library? There's two entrances to the library, correct?
Correct.
You remember anybody else being around?
No one came through it. Like, no one, like, stuck their head in. It was, like, just the two of us.
Did you think, as far as where he was in your conversation with JT, were you comfortable that he wasn't going to go anywhere, wasn't going to drive?
Yeah, when I asked him very specifically, you're not going to go anywhere, like, you have some place to stay, he, like, affirmatively said, yes, I'm not going anywhere, I'm fine.
And did he specifically say one way or the other whether someone was picking him up or whether he was staying there?
He did not.
Okay. Could you tell, did you see him use his phone at all while you were talking to him? Did he have his phone out at all?
He might have had it in his lap when I walked in, but I do not remember, like, specifically. He was never using it while he was talking to me, because I consider that really rude in, like, modern millennial standing. It's like, if you're talking with someone, you put your phone away.
So the bottom line is you're not sure.
Correct.
Okay. You said your recollection was his speech was okay. He's talked to you about Ravenscroft,
Yes.
and he made a statement about being inebriated and stoned.
Correct.
Okay. With regards to the stoned aspect of it, did you follow up with that with him at all?
No.
With what you were observing of him, did it appear that he had some effects that were non-alcohol related?
Objection.
Effects that were non-alcohol. That's so broad. Effects could be anything.
I guess if I could rephrase the question, Your Honor. Was there anything about his appearance, his demeanor, that indicated anything other than alcohol intoxication?
And when I asked him if he was stoned, I only said that because it's just to gauge where someone is, to make sure it's like you're not going to do anything. If anything, sluggish would be a possible word I could use.
You notice anything about his eyes?
No.
Okay. So sluggish is the only thing you would attribute to.
Yeah, slowed down, impaired. Yeah.
That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Redirect?
Mr. Johnson, did you smell anything about
I did not.
about JT?
I did not.
Didn't smell any marijuana on him?
I did not.
You spoke with Sergeant Hool and you said it was approximately 10 p.m. when you saw JT in the library, is that right?
I would assume yes.
And he asked you if you did any drugs or pills with JT that night, did you?
I did not.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I don't have any further questions.
Recross,
No, thanks.
you missed that now. Please call your next witness.
Your Honor, this has a statement called Sergeant Eric Sweden to the stand.
Right? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you give before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Thank you.
Sergeant Sweden, good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon.
Will you please state your name for the record?
My name is Eric Sweden
And Sergeant Sweden, how are you employed?
with the Raleigh Police Department.
How long have you been with the Raleigh Police Department?
15 years.
And I've called you Sergeant Sweden. Are you currently a sergeant with the Raleigh Police Department?
Yes, I am.
How long have you been a sergeant with the Raleigh Police Department?
Right at 4 years.
4 years. What are your duties and responsibilities as a sergeant, sir?
Right now, I'm actually assigned to patrol. So my duties include providing resources for 7 officers who report directly to me, assisting them in whatever they need to run the operations of our district.
Prior to becoming a sergeant with the Raleigh Police Department, what duties did you have?
I spent 1 year assigned to our training center as training staff, 3 years with the reconstruction unit, a brief period as an investigator, and then 6 years on patrol.
You mentioned a reconstruction unit. What's the reconstruction unit?
The crash reconstruction unit is a group of folks. Right now it's a sergeant and 3 officers whose primary responsibility is to investigate serious injury and fatality wrecks.
Sergeant, on the night of June 28, 2014, were you on duty sworn, and so employed as a Raleigh police officer?
I was.
Can you tell us a little bit about what your duties and responsibilities were that night?
I don't remember what we were doing that night historically. What happens is we come in for the night shift, make sure that the officers on the road have the supplies that they need, make sure that the staffing levels are adequate, and then I just assist them with whatever they need in their nightly operation.
Sergeant Sweden, did you have the opportunity to, on that night, sir, to go to a crash scene at Hunting Ridge Road?
I did.
Can you tell the members of the jury a little bit about where Hunting Ridge Road is?
Hunting Ridge Road is is right off of Falls of the Neuse Road in North Raleigh.
How did you come upon that crash scene, sir?
I actually heard the call come out. It was dispatched to 2 of my officers as a collision with injuries. I happened to be on Falls of the Neuse Road, probably 5,000 block maybe, which is close to Millbrook. I heard the call go out. I figured I was close. I was going to go make sure they had what they needed.
What time did that dispatch come out, Sergeant Sweden?
It was right about 10:30.
10:30 p.m.?
10:30 p.m., I'm sorry, yeah.
So that would be the time in which the crash was first reported to the Raleigh Police Department.
Yes.
And how long did it take you to get to the scene there, sir?
I don't know exactly, maybe 2-3 minutes.
What did the scene look like once you arrived?
When I turned onto Hunting Ridge and I'm starting to approach Tan Bark, I started to notice some debris in the roadway. I noticed some tire marks, wasn't exactly sure what it was, some debris, I started following it down, noticed some damage to the roadway, and then when I looked up, I saw a white car that was up against a tree.
What type of damage to the roadway did you notice?
The first thing that drew my attention is there was a storm grate right there at the corner. I think that's tan bark, and there was damage to it, significant damage. The concrete was pulled up. There was grass from the sidewalk that was missing, and I later learned that that was the path that the car took as it left the roadway.
Did you notice anything like a tree there, Sergeant Sweden?
There was a couple of issues. The car that I saw was up against a tree.
And how did you proceed in your investigation?
I was the first one there. Obviously, I was close. So what I did was I put my car in a position that anybody else coming down the street wouldn't be involved in this wreck, and that the fire department and the ambulance and the other policemen could get there.
And what happened next?
Once I got out of my car, I started to walk up to the white car. I noticed that there was one person seated in the car. The car was destroyed, and I just saw the one person in there. As I'm walking up, the Raleigh Fire Department had shown up. They had gotten off the fire truck, and they actually were the first people to come up to the driver of the car. They were there, maybe a second before me, to the driver.
And how was that, how was the driver, was he alive at that point, Sergeant Sweden?
No.
Were you able to identify the driver of that vehicle?
Eventually. So the driver was a young man. He was well dressed. I didn't have his identification right away, and we ran the license plate for the car and took the owner's picture, and it wasn't the same. So the owner's driver's license photo was not the person who was in the car. So it took us just a little bit to try to identify who exactly the driver was.
Who was the registered owner of the vehicle, if you recall?
Mr. Taylor is the registered owner. I don't have his first name written down, I'm sorry.
But you could tell it wasn't, you could tell that Mr. Taylor was not the same Mr. Taylor.
That's right.
That was in the vehicle. How were you eventually able to identify who the driver of the vehicle was?
Well, a couple of things happened. Actually, the area around the wreck, we put some yellow crime scene tape just to secure so nobody could move any evidence, so nobody would drive through and wreck that. One of the officers was parked up about a block and called me on the radio and said, "Hey, I've got somebody up here who has a question about the wreck." And I had walked up there, and I identified two people, and they said, "Is this a white BMW?" And I said, "What do you know about the white BMW?" And they said, "Well, we think that might be our car, my son." And at this point, I did not know who the driver actually was.
Who were the two individuals that you spoke with at the police station?
Mr. Taylor and his wife.
And did you know Mr. Taylor, we kind of identified as Trooper Taylor before that incident, or before this incident?
When I looked at the picture, the driver's license photo, I thought the photo was familiar, but I didn't know why.
You recognized him through law enforcement?
Yes, sir.
And you said the driver's license photo, you referred to the registration.
Yes.
What did you learn from the Taylors there while at the crime scene tape?
So they had mentioned that their son, Jonathan, was at a party and had been traveling through that area in the white BMW. That they had gone to the house of the party, and they had actually just traveled through that stretch of roadway a couple minutes beforehand. I told them I was going to go back down to the wreck scene, see if I can get some information for them, and I'd return and talk to them.
And what happened at that point?
At that time, Officer Manukas with the reconstruction unit had been called. He showed up. They worked to identify the driver, who was identified as Jonathan Taylor, and Officer Manukas and I walked back up to Mr. Taylor and his wife and informed him that in fact his son was killed in the wreck.
And how were you able to identify that it was Jonathan Taylor?
His driver's license.
If you recall looking at that driver's license, what age was J.T. Taylor at that time?
That I don't know. Officer Manukas would be able to answer that question.
When you notified the Taylors of that it was their son, what was their reaction?
You don't expect anything like that. I think immediately Mr. Taylor put his hands on his face and dropped to his knees. Mrs. Taylor began to cry. We were with them for a good amount of time. He was asking, what's next? He said, this is not supposed to happen to me. And once he said that, I immediately recognized what his profession is as a state trooper. He said, I do this all the time. It's not supposed to happen to me. And this went on for probably 20 minutes where we just didn't know what to do next.
At some point, did you leave the Taylors and go back to the wreck scene or crash scene and continue the investigation?
I did. I'd asked the Taylors if they had somebody that they could call to come to the scene. And then Officer Manukas and I proceeded back to the wreck scene to finish the investigation.
You mentioned a moment ago Sergeant Sweden is part of what the Taylors told you is that JT was coming from a party.
Yes.
Did you follow up with that, Sergeant?
So Mr. and Mrs. Taylor shared with me some text messages that their son had made. I believe to the lines of, can you come pick me up, which is what actually brought Mr. Taylor to the house. And that's what had him travel through that section of roadway before the wreck had happened. He gave me, I believe, a name and an address of a wedding that his son was invited to, and if I'm not mistaken, he said that invitation was just that day, and he was worried about where he's going to get a suit for the wedding coming up. And then he gave me an address of on Vance Street.
About what the house number was on Vance Street.
I don't have it written down. I don't.
Why did you feel it was important, Sergeant Sweden, to get this information from the Taylors in terms of where JT had been coming from?
Investigating serious injury and fatal crashes, there's a lot of things that need to be answered besides what happened at the wreck, how fast the car was going, is there a roadway issue? It's where were they coming from beforehand? To answer the question for the family, why did this happen? So when I learned that it's possible that Mr. Taylor, Mrs. Taylor's son was coming from a party, one of the things that I wanted to try to figure out was, is this the last place he came from? Could this wreck be impairment related? And if so, could somebody be responsible for this? It's just part of an investigation. We do it on every serious injury and fatal collision.
How did you go about investigating where JT was coming from?
So when I learned the address from Mr. Taylor, I notified the watch commander. Just because this scene was large, it was over several blocks. We need a lot of folks to help maintain it. I gave the address to the watch commander. The watch commander, I believed, called the supervisor in the district where the house is to have an officer go by and just knock on the door and ask if they know anything about it.
What is you mentioned a watch commander. What's a watch commander?
So with the city of Raleigh, there's 6 districts. Each district is managed by 2 sergeants and a lieutenant, and then there's one person who's actually in charge of this city, and that would be the watch commander. But he's responsible for the overall operations of the entire city at any given time.
So that night there was one person that you called and
Yes.
And then to let them know what was going on.
Yes, sir.
Approximately, what time did you make that notification, Sergeant, if you recall?
I don't recall.
How long had you been at the Rex when you made that call and had that conversation with the Taylors?
It might have been I was there at 10:30, maybe an hour at most, but I don't know for sure.
How did you proceed that night, Sergeant?
I went back up to speak with the Taylors to see what, if anything, they needed, if they needed phone calls to be made to get them some support to the scene, and that support came in to help them out. After that, just work with the reconstruction unit to see what they need as far as their investigation. That was all.
In report, Sergeant Sweden, does it appear that it was 904 Vance Street that you sent the officer to, or had someone?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, sir. Right here, 904 Vance Street.
Did you have any further conversation later in the night with individuals that had responded to 904 Vance Street?
I actually did.
Okay, tell us about that.
Several hours after this, I arrived at another vehicle crash on Six Forks Road, and I was just talking to one of the EMS workers that was there about the wreck, and they said, oh, we were down at 904 Vance Street for, I think they said for a young girl who was unconscious from alcohol. And the reason I remembered that was because that was the same address that I had given to the watch commander to check to see where Mr. Taylor was earlier in that night.
Did you have any occasion to go over to Vance Street yourself?
No.
Okay. So you just learned this information from EMS work?
Yes.
You mentioned that you worked with the crash reconstruction unit. Sergeant Hoolan and Officer Manukas behind me. Was Officer Manukas present that night helping you investigate this scene?
He was.
If I may have just a moment, John. Thank you, Sergeant Sweden. I don't have any further questions at this time.
Cross-examination.
Just a couple, Your Honor. Thank you. Good afternoon, Sergeant Sweet.
Yes, sir.
You indicated that you were the officer that had to give the terrible news to the Taylors. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And with regards to your conversation with them, they tried to give you as much information as possible about where JT had been, correct?
We had a conversation about some text messages, the fact that he was looking for a suit for a wedding, and where the wedding was, yes.
And was there anything, did the topic of alcohol ever come up when y'all were speaking as a concern?
I believe the conversation, two questions might have been asked. One was about speed, and I believe the other one was there alcohol involved?
That was a question to you.
I believe so, yes, sir.
Okay. That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Redirect.
No, Your Honor. Thank you, sir.
You may step down, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Please call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, this time say we call Officer Chris Wall to the stand.
Sir, if you would please place your left hand on the Bible, raise your right. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you give before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I swear. Officer Wall, good afternoon to you, sir.
Afternoon.
Will you please state your name for the record?
I'm Officer Christopher Wall, Raleigh Police Department.
Officer Wall, how long have you been with the Raleigh Police Department?
A little over 3 years.
3 years. And can you describe for us what your duties and responsibilities are as an officer with the Raleigh Police Department?
I work in the field operations patrol, so I'm on the, whereas Sergeant Sweden is a patrol supervisor, I would work under him. I don't normally work under him, but I would work under him if he were my sergeant.
And tell us a little bit about what you do as a member of the field operations unit.
I take 911 calls and I investigate various crimes.
Yeah, what type, when you receive a 911 call, what do you do?
Typically there's comments in the call. It tells me if they want a phone call or if I need to respond to the address, things of that nature.
You also do general traffic enforcement, so speeding tickets, red light tickets, all that kind of good stuff.
Yes, sir. I do all that.
Any prior law enforcement experience, Officer Wall?
No, sir.
And any military experience?
Yes, sir.
Tell us about that.
5 years in the United States Navy.
Officer Wall, I want to turn your attention to June 28th of 2014. Sir, on that date and time, were you on duty, duly sworn, and so employed as a Raleigh police officer?
Yes, I was.
And on June 28th, 2014, and I guess going into June 29th of 2014, did you have the opportunity to respond to 904 Vance Street?
I did.
Is 904 Vance Street within Raleigh, North Carolina, Wake County?
It is.
So, if you can describe for us under what circumstances you arrived there at Vance Street.
I was called by my supervisor at the time, who I don't believe was a watch commander, but information was passed on to him from the watch commander at the time. He told me that the wreck that happened up in the North District, that was a fatality, was the person in the car came from a party at 904 Vance Street, and I needed to go investigate.
What time did you receive that instruction from your supervisor, Officer Wall?
I don't have the exact time written down. I want to say it was shortly before 1 a.m. in the morning, because I arrived at that location at 1 a.m. in the morning, approximately.
Let me talk to you just a little bit about the wreck itself. Had you been to that wreck scene?
No, sir, I have not.
You did not go to that wreck scene at all that night?
I did not.
And other than your supervisor telling you that it was a fatality, did you know any other details about that wreck?
I did not. Like I said, the only details that I was told was that the person might have come from a party at that address and that I needed to go investigate. That is all the information that I got.
And when you say you were going to investigate, how were you going to investigate that?
I was going to go investigate, see if there was a party there, if there was more impaired people that were going to likely go out and get into a car, or if there was underage drinkers there.
And did you in fact go to 904 Vance Street?
I did.
You said you recall or have noted what time you arrived there. What time did you arrive at 904 Vance Street?
I noted in my report that it was approximately 1 a.m., so it was sometime around 1 a.m.
So when you got the call from your supervisor to go to Vance Street, how far away were you?
I don't recall. I'll tell you, in the district that I work, it probably takes less than 5 minutes to get anywhere.
When you arrived there at 904 Vance Street, describe kind of what you saw.
I pulled up to the address. I saw the house, the numbers, 904 Vance Street. The house was, for the most part, dark. There was maybe a few lights on. There wasn't anything significant on in the house that would tell me that anything was going on inside the house.
How about vehicles? Were there vehicles parked
I
around?
don't recall. I believe in the garage there might have been a car or two, but I don't recall if there was any parked on the street or the driveway.
So nothing of note, just you looking out at the house when you arrived.
Yes, sir.
And did you park in the driveway or on the street? Where'd you go?
I parked on the street.
You get there and you see there's not, it looks fairly quiet. Did you decide to go ahead with your investigation?
I did. I was told to go out there and investigate, so I did. I went up to the door. I attempted to make contact several times by ringing the doorbell and knocking on the door. It took several minutes for somebody to actually come to the door.
And let me ask you about that. Was when you say you went to the door, did you go to the front door to start with?
I did. To start with, I went to the front door.
All right. And you said you rang the door there, rang the doorbell, knocked on the door. What did you do?
Yes, sir. I went up to the door. I rang the doorbell, knocked on the door. I took my issued flashlight and kind of shined around, see if there was anybody inside the house.
And did you receive any response, sir?
I did not.
How long would you say that you were there just at the front door?
I'd probably say about 2 to 3 minutes.
All right. After you didn't find anybody there at the front door, what'd you do then?
I walked around to the side of the house to see if there was anything out either in the backyard or on the side of the house, because there was another door on the side of the house with windows.
Did you go all the way around to the backyard, or was it a side door, do you recall?
I believe there was a gate around back, and it may have been locked, or I just didn't go through it. I think I was tall enough to be able to see on the other side, and all I saw was backyard, nothing back there.
If I may approach the witness, Your Honor.
You may.
Officer Wald, showing you what's been identified, what's been introduced to State's Exhibit 16, do you recognize that area of the house?
I do. That's the front of the house.
Okay, and obviously there's party going on in this at this time, but not when you arrived. But does that look like the front of the house?
It does.
Okay, and is that the front door that you went to originally?
It is, and you can see the numerics 904 above the door.
If we can publish that item, that's State's Exhibit number 16, R2N36966. And there's a laser pointer in front of you as well, so Wall, if you can kind of show us where you went to start with.
I went right here to start with, the front door, which was shut.
Okay. And I'm going to hand you State's Exhibit number 42. It's been identified as the back area of the house. Did you ever make it around there, sir?
No, I didn't make it around there. This was the, I was thinking that this fence is right here that I looked over. All I saw was the backyard.
So you went to the back door. And if we can go back to State's Exhibit 16, which is at 6966, using that photograph, can you show us where the side door that you went to would have been?
All right, so if I start right here at the front door and I walk around here, it kind of connects to the driveway. There's a driveway, and I believe it's a separate garage that's not actually connected to the house. If you walk back there, there's a side door and there's windows, which is where the kitchen area is.
Did it appear that there had been anything related to that wedding there at the side door, any tables left or anything like that?
I didn't see anything, and again, I wasn't told it was a wedding. All I was told it was a party.
Gotcha. So, and we can leave that one up, we'll leave that photograph up. But when you went there to the side door, what did you see, Officer Wall?
I went to the side door, and I kind of was looking around, and as I was looking into the kitchen, which didn't have any lights on, and there may have been some dim lights or night lights in the back, I saw a figure which appeared to be a female. I went from the window to the side door, knocked on the door and announced my name and that I'm with the Raleigh Police Department. At that time, I walked back over. Nobody came to the door. It was probably I waited about 10 seconds. Nobody came to the door. I walked back over to the window, and there was nobody there. Where I saw the figure, the female figure, there's an island right there, and she was on the other side of it.
Did you tell anything about that female figure, race, age, anything like that, anything descriptive about her?
It was dark, so, I mean, the only thing that I could tell you is that it appeared the person had long hair.
Did you tell what color?
No.
And could you tell if it was a young person, older person, anything like that?
I couldn't tell if it was a young person or old person.
How long, so you knocked on the door and approximately how long was it after you knocked on the door that you saw this person?
I want to say it was probably a good 5 minutes before I actually, from the start of when I actually tried to make contact from when I saw the person, it was about 5 minutes.
So are you starting from your first knock on the front door?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So then you go around to the side door as you showed us, and then you knock on the door again there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And how long after you knocked on the door was it before you saw this female?
The side door?
Yes, sir. Was you at the side door?
I believe I might have knocked on the door and then from there kind of walked around because I noticed there was windows. Like I said, I had my flashlight out. I was shining in there to see if there was anybody inside the house. And I turned my flashlight off. At that point, I saw somebody in the kitchen.
Did you turn your flashlight back on at that point?
No, I didn't. Because I went straight to the door to knock, hoping that the person would come to the door.
And what was the light? Were the lights on in the kitchen?
They were not. There may have been some night lights or very dim lights.
When you saw her, why did you decide to turn your flashlight off at that point?
I didn't turn it off because I saw her. I was kind of looking around, and I may have been at the very back of the end of the kitchen. I turned it off to kind of turn around, and as I was turning around, that's when I kind of caught the image.
Did that individual, that female, ever come to the door?
Nobody that matched the image that I saw.
Were you able to see where that individual went?
No. Assuming because of the layout of the kitchen that the person ducked behind the island.
Objection, motion to strike.
Sustained, motion to strike allowed, disregard the conclusion of this witness as to what do you assume that person did?
When that person disappeared, who did you see next?
I took my flashlight out again, shined it around the kitchen, and I shined it up to the second floor. There is an oval or a circle-shaped window on the second floor above that door. I saw who was later identified as Miss Kimberly Matthews in the window.
Is Miss Kimberly Matthews the defendant here in the courtroom today?
Yes, sir. Miss Matthews sitting at the defendant table with a black sweater on.
Mrs. Matthews, is this a different person or different female than you saw there in the kitchen when you went to knock on that door?
Yes, 100%.
Tell us why you're 100% on that, Officer Long.
She would have to run pretty fast up the stairs to be able to get to the window to where she was. That and the fact that the image that I saw had long hair, she has short hair.
So two different people.
Yes, sir.
So you didn't see where the first female went, but you saw where Mrs. Matthews was coming from.
Yes, sir.
When you saw Mrs. Matthews, what happened?
I believe that I might have either knocked on the door again or announced myself again. She acknowledged me, either by my flashlight or just my presence outside. She came down to the door and answered the door on the side of the house.
And at this point, did you see where that first female went?
No, I did not.
What happened? Tell us about your conversation with Miss Matthews when she came to the door.
As soon as she opened the door, I introduced myself. I told her that I was here for a party call, and then I asked her about the female that was in the kitchen. She told me that she didn't know any females in the kitchen and that the only people inside the house were her husband, and her son.
Did she ever mention any other females being there in that residence?
She did not.
And why were you asking her who was in the house with her?
Because it was apparent to me that somebody was trying to hide from me.
And you said she didn't identify anyone else. How'd your conversation proceed?
After she told me that there was nobody else in the house, I kind of switched over back to the party call and asked her about the party. At this point, I believe Dr. Matthews, her husband, came into the kitchen and entered the conversation.
And is Dr. Matthews present here in the courtroom today?
He is. Dr. Matthews sitting at the defendant table with a blazer on.
Could you tell where Dr. Matthews came from, sir?
I believe he came from the same place that Miss Matthews came from. He basically came straight through the kitchen towards the door. I'm not sure the layout of the house, so I don't know where the stairs are or where the bedrooms are.
Did you see him coming from that landing like you described Mrs. Matthews coming from, or were you looking up there at that point?
No, I was actually either in the doorway or just standing right outside the doorway. My attention was on Miss Matthews at that point.
And Officer Wall, you're dressed in your Raleigh police uniform here today in court. Were you dressed in a similar manner back on June 28th?
Yes, I was.
Except for short sleeves.
It possibly was short sleeves.
When Dr. Matthews entered the conversation, what was his statement to you?
The very first thing he said to me was, "Oh my God, JT is dead."
And at that point, Officer Wall, had you made any statements to anyone about anyone being deceased?
No, the only statements I made were ones regarding a party.
And what did you tell him specifically? What did you tell Mrs. Matthews specifically about the party?
I told her that there was a complaint. Somebody had called in a loud noise call.
And is that the point where Dr. Matthews showed up?
At some point, I don't exactly recall after what question or what statement he showed up, but it was shortly after Miss Matthews answered the door.
And what did Dr. Matthews say again?
He said, "Oh my God, JT is dead."
How many times did he say that, Officer Wall?
I don't recall exact number, but he did say it more than once.
And when he made this statement to you, what was your response? What was your thought process on him making this statement to you about someone being dead?
That he knew that someone was dead. My statement to him was I didn't know anything about that, and then I kind of went back into the party situation.
How did y'all's conversation proceed?
I asked both of them about the party. They stated that there was a wedding at the location, 904 Vance Street, and I obtained both of their names, as I do with all situations. I always identify people, and he said that either Miss Matthews or Mr. Matthews said that the wedding was over an hour before I arrived, so put it at about the midnight mark.
What else did they tell you there at that time, Officer Wall?
So at that time, after I got all the questions about the wedding or party, I kind of went back into inquiring about JT. At this point, I had not heard this name before. I didn't know who this was. I asked him about JT. He said that he was at the wedding that was held at that location and that he was drinking. Mr. Matthews stated that JT was intoxicated.
And Dr. Matthews told you that there at the scene?
Yes.
And this was on your first interaction with him. We'll talk about another interaction here in a moment.
Yes, sir. This was the first interaction.
So did he tell you what specifically he was drinking?
I don't believe so. The only thing he said was just he was intoxicated.
So he didn't tell you what he was drinking, but whatever he was drinking made him intoxicated.
I didn't make notes of it, so I'm not sure if he did or not.
But he told you he was intoxicated.
Yes, sir.
And did he tell you that JT had been at that specific wedding?
Yes, sir.
So he was aware of him drinking at the wedding.
Objection. Sustained.
What else did he tell you?
He said that he called JT's father to come pick him up, and he thought that JT was picked up by his father, but said he left on his own, in his own car.
Can you repeat? Start with the part about what Dr. Matthews told you about calling JT's father.
Mr. Matthews stated that he called JT's father to come pick him up. Mr. Matthews thought that JT was picked up by his father, but he left in his own car.
Did he tell you how he knew he left in his own car?
He did not.
When he told you this information, Officer Wall, what did you do?
At this point, there wasn't any more that I could do as far as the investigation goes, because of the little information that I had received. I got all the information that I needed. I identified the people, so I left the residence.
And at that point, Officer Wall, did you still know that it was JT that had been involved in the crash that your supervisors had told you about?
I assumed it was, but I didn't know that for a fact. Nobody had told me that.
And the reason for your assumption was based on what Dr. Matthews had told you?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Matthews described for you his whether or not JT's father actually responded there to his residence.
I believe he said that he thought he did, but he was, like I said, he said that he thought that he was picked up by his father, but in fact he drove his own car.
Mrs. Matthews, while this conversation is occurring with Dr. Matthews, is she making any statements to you?
I don't believe so, but I believe my attention was on Dr. Matthews while I was talking to him.
The Matthews' general demeanor at this point, Officer Wall, kind of how were they acting? You mentioned the statements they've made. What was your general impression of their demeanor?
Dr. Matthews, like I said, he said several times, "Oh my God, JT is dead." He kind of it was like it was sinking in, that the fact that somebody had died. I don't recall Miss Matthews' demeanor at all, other than she seemed surprised that I was there from when she came down to answer the door.
The unidentified female, did you have any further conversation with Mrs. Matthews, Dr. Matthews, about that? How did you leave that situation?
I kind of just left it the way it was, and left the residence. Went back out to my patrol car.
At any point, even after you got to talking with them about JT and the wreck, did anyone ever mention anything about anyone else being in that home?
No, sir.
Issue the Matthews a citation or anything like that at that point, or you just left?
I did not.
All right. What happened at that point, Officer Wall?
I walked back out to my car to call my supervisor, let him know what was going on. At that point, I checked pending calls in the city of Raleigh, as I do all the time, every time I clear a call. I noticed that there was a pending overdose call at 904 Vance Street, the address I was at. The comments of the call said that there was somebody inside the residence who may have alcohol poisoning or may be too intoxicated. At this point, I went back to the residence through the front door.
Well, let me ask you about that, Officer Wall, a little bit. When you cleared the first call at the Matthews residence, what time did you clear that? Did you check out in any way?
I know that the overdose call came in about 1:19, so it had to be shortly after I left them at the door. So I'd probably say I cleared at about 1:18, 1:17.
Let me ask it to you this way. When you were having a conversation with the Matthews there at the side door, did they ever mention to you that, hey, we just called 911 or anything like that?
No, they did not.
So the overdose call, you might notice that immediately when you got back to your patrol car.
I did.
And how you said you see that through some kind of call system. Describe that.
In our cars, we have a computer. We call them mobile computer terminals. Inside on the system that we use, we can check pending calls, basically calls that haven't been dispatched out to any units that are there. So I check those calls to see if, since I'm in the area, if there's any other calls in the area that I can go handle. At that point, the address showed up, 904 Vance Street, and then when I clicked on it, it'll tell me the comments of the call, and at that point it said something to the point of there's an intoxicated person inside the house.
When you saw that call, what was your reaction, Officer Wall?
My reaction was to immediately go back inside the house.
And did you do that?
I did.
How did you reapproach the house at that point?
I reapproached the house to the front door, and I either knocked on the door or I believe Miss Matthews let me in. And then she took me downstairs to the lower part of the house to a room where I was shown a young female.
Let's back up a little bit. When you get there on that second time when you knock on the door, what do you tell Miss Matthews that you're there to investigate at this point?
I don't recall. I don't think I told her anything because I'm assuming that she knew why I was there.
How did you tell her who you were looking for, what you were looking for?
I don't recall.
How did y'all get back down to the basement?
I was taken down there.
By who?
I believe it was Miss Matthews.
Where was Dr. Matthews at this point?
Dr. Matthews was downstairs with the female.
You described earlier that you couldn't see the inside the house where the female went. When you went inside the house to go to the basement, can you describe for us where the basement door is in relation to the kitchen area that you were standing at earlier?
I don't recall. To be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure where the basement stairwell was.
Do you recall if it was near where you were?
It wasn't too far away. It wasn't on the other side of the house. I believe it was on the same side of the house.
As the kitchen?
Yes, sir.
Mrs. Matthews, she walks you into the basement?
Yes.
And is she having any conversation with you at this point about what's going on?
I don't recall. I didn't note anything in my report about a conversation.
You go into the basement, and what do you find?
I find Dr. Matthews with a female downstairs in a room, and there's a bed. She's on the bed. At this point, she's breathing. I don't know if she's conscious, but she's clearly intoxicated, and there's a strong odor of alcohol.
What did you do?
I had another conversation with Dr. Matthews about people in the house because before they had told me that it was just Miss Matthews, Dr. Matthews, and their son.
And then both of them told you that it was only the family members there in the house?
I can't recall if Dr. Matthews told me, but I tell you for sure that Miss Matthews did tell me that it was just the three of them.
And did you confront them with that, Officer Wall, and say, hey, I was just here 2 minutes ago, you didn't tell me about this person?
I did. I believe my words might have been, I thought that there was only three of you in the house. Is there anybody else in the house that I need to know about? At that point, Dr. Matthews said no.
Did they give you any explanation as to why they did not mention this female earlier?
No, they didn't give me any explanation.
Were you able to identify who that female was down in the basement?
I don't recall exactly what point I identified her, but she was identified.
Well, who was it down there in the basement?
Mary Ergish, I believe.
Mariana Ergish.
Yes, sir.
What was Dr. Matthews was down there with her when you reapproached the house and went down?
Yes, sir.
What was he doing with her at that point?
I can't recall exactly what he was doing with her. All I know is he was kind of standing over her. He may have been holding her head or holding her, something to that effect.
Other than being passed out, could you tell if she was sick in any other way?
She was clearly intoxicated.
Was there vomit anywhere?
Not that I recall.
What did you do down there, Officer Wall?
At this point, I looked around the room to see if I could find any kind of identification on her. Looking through, seeing if there was any kind of drugs, prescription medication, anything like that. When EMS and fire respond to the calls, that's the first thing that they're going to ask most of the time is going to be, what are they taking, any prescription or non-prescription illegal drugs.
Did you find any drugs on Miss Ergish?
I did not.
And how about any alcohol or alcohol containers? Did you find anything about her?
I don't recall finding any alcohol containers in that room.
Did any illicit materials down there in the room when you found Miss Ergish?
Objection.
Overruled.
No.
What happened at that point, Officer Wall? Let me ask you this. How was she dressed down there in the basement?
I don't recall. I don't recall exactly what she was wearing.
What did you do when you found her down there and had this conversation with the Matthews?
EMS and I believe Raleigh Fire showed up, as they do with all overdose calls. Alcohol poisoning comes out as an overdose because of the inherent risk in it. EMS came down and I got out of the room. It was just kind of a small room, and I wanted to give them room to be able to work in case they needed to do any life-saving measures.
And to be clear, Officer Wall, you did not request EMS at this point.
No, EMS gets automatically dispatched on all overdose calls.
So the information that you saw on your computer back in the patrol vehicle, that was dispatched through 911?
Yes, sir.
So at any point, did you call and say, hey, we need an ambulance over here?
No, they automatically get dispatched.
How long would you say EMS was down with Miss Ergish in the basement?
It wasn't too long. It was probably maybe 5-10 minutes until they took her up to the EMS bus.
You mentioned Dr. Matthews and Mrs. Matthews were present in the basement with you. Was there anyone else in that family down there?
Yes, their son, who's I believe later identified as Thomas Matthews.
What interaction did you have with him?
I didn't have much interaction with him verbally, but I did observe him in the room when I was down there.
What did you observe about Mr. Thomas Matthews?
Mr. Matthews, I wasn't able to get close enough to smell anything, but he did look like he was intoxicated as well. He looked at me and kind of had a grin on his face. Didn't seem concerned about anything.
How about Dr. Matthews and Mrs. Matthews? What was their general demeanor like down there in terms of their concern?
It seemed like their concern was only after I had left. Before that, they had no issue with this female that was in the basement.
And when you say after you left the first
The
time?
first time, yes, sir.
What happened at that point, Officer Wall?
I steps outside the room. I overheard Dr. Matthews talking to EMS, saying that he had to slap her a couple times to get her to wake up. I didn't hear much of the conversation. Like I said, it was a small room, so I wanted to get out of there and give them as much room to work, since they are the medical professionals. At that point, after a short time in the room, they brought her up to the EMS bus.
And when you say they brought her up, who all brought Miss Ergish up?
EMS and Raleigh Fire.
And where did Miss Ergish go at that point?
She went inside the EMS bus and sat on the bench inside.
Did you have any further interaction with her?
Yes, I did.
What about that interaction?
She was very uncooperative with EMS. EMS was asking what she drank, which is standard questions that they ask. They want to know exactly what they're dealing with and if they do need to transport to the hospital. She would not tell them what she drank. She questioned them. She questioned why she had to tell them. She questioned why it mattered what she was drinking. After a very extensive convincing, she did finally tell them that she was drinking wine.
Did she tell you where she, or tell you, or did you ever hear her say where she was drinking that wine?
I don't recall.
How was Miss Ergish dealt with there? Was she transported? What happened?
I believe her parents were called. She was not transported to the hospital.
Did you hear her make any other statements about what she was doing there that night?
No, I don't recall any other statements that she made.
When you found Miss Ergish there and saw that she was intoxicated, did you talk with the Matthews about Miss Ergish and what had happened to her?
I don't believe so. I don't recall.
Did you ask them, what she'd been doing?
At some point, I believe they told me that she was down in the basement, and that they were checking on her every hour, or Dr. Matthews was actually checking on her every hour.
And did they make any statement? He had told you about JT being at the wedding. Did he make any statements to you about if Miss Ergish had been at the wedding as well?
Yes.
What did he tell you?
In my notes, I have written down that he said that she was sleeping down here, and I was checking on her every hour. She was very gone when I came down here, and I felt the need, though I needed to call for EMS, and there's no one else in the house.
There's no one else in the house?
Yes, sir.
Were you able to identify the ages of JT and Anna Ergish, Officer Wall?
I was able to identify the age of Anna Ergish, but not JT. I didn't do any investigating into JT.
How old was Anna Ergish?
Objection.
Basis for the objection.
We don't know how he...
Approach. You may answer.
In the report, I have her at the incident age of 18.
Okay. And Officer Wall, when you knew that Miss Urgish was 18 years of age and intoxicated, did you confront the Matthews with that about an underage person being intoxicated in the house?
I don't have it written in the report. I don't recall if I did or not.
What was their demeanor throughout this incident as you were dealing with Miss Urgish?
Very nonchalant, like it's not really a big deal.
Why do you say that, Officer Wall?
Just the way that they looked, their reaction, the look on their face, that wasn't too concerned. That the fact that they had a girl who was underage, under the age of 21, who was highly intoxicated in their basement.
May I have just a moment, Your Honor?
You may. Excuse me.
In speaking with Mr. Matthews, looking at reviewing your report, did Mr. Matthews, Dr. Matthews indicate to you how Anna arrived at their residence, or who she arrived at their residence with?
I don't recall who told me, but I was told that she arrived with JT.
Objection.
Sustained.
Motion to strike the answer.
Motion to strike allowed, disregard what this witness says he was told regarding how Ms. Urgish arrived at the Matthews residence.
In regards to that, did Mr. Matthews Dr. Matthews or Mrs. Matthews make any statements to you in regards to how Ms. Urgish arrived at this wedding?
Looking back at my notes, yes.
Was it Dr. Matthews or Mrs. Matthews?
Mr. Matthews or Dr. Matthews.
Okay. What did Dr. Matthews tell you about how Anna Urgish arrived at this wedding?
Dr. Matthews, he just stated that Miss Urgish arrived at the wedding with JT.
And in speaking with Mrs. Matthews, going back to your first approach at the house, did Mrs. Matthews tell you who it was she thought was the person you saw in the kitchen?
Miss Matthews only told me that it was her husband and son inside. She didn't know who would be in the kitchen.
Thank you, Officer Wall. I don't have any further questions at this time.
Would you rather recess before we start cross-examination?
Your Honor, if it's the intent for to break at 1, I think that.
Yes, sir. All right. We'll stop now for our lunch recess until 2:30. Please remember to follow my instructions. Everyone else remain in place. The jury is excused.